bird struck before Miss Aloyne Fairfax had properly set foot upon Northumberland's soil. She stood poised upon the step of the hired carriage, one boot suspended above the mud of the castle yard, when a dark shape dropped from the gatehouse tower like a stone hurled from heaven. Wings spread wide, black and terrible against the gray November sky, the Falcon descended with such force that the coachman's hat flew clean from his head and landed in a puddle beside the wheel. The man cried out. The horses reared. The wind carried the sharp, fierce scream of the bird across the ancient stones of Westmore Castle. Aloyne did not scream. She had known worse welcomes in her life. The Falcon circled once, low and deliberate, her amber eyes blazing with something that was not mere wildness but warning. The coachman cowered beside the carriage wheel, hands over his face, as though the bird were judgment itself descending from the tower. Then the Falcon screamed again. The sound struck Aloyne's chest like a blow, cold, pure, unyielding as the northern hills. Something inside her shifted as though a door long closed had cracked open. Without thinking, she removed her right glove. The leather slipped from her fingers. The November wind bit into her bare skin. Slowly, steadily, she raised her hand, palm upward, as if greeting not the bird but the wind itself. The Falcon folded her wings and dropped. She did not land gently. Her talons closed around Aloyne's wrist with strength that would have frightened a wiser woman. Her feathers were dark brown, the color of old oak soaked in rain. Her eyes burned gold. She stared at Aloyne with fierce scrutiny as though measuring her worth. "Good morning," Aloyne said quietly. The coachman made a small choking sound from the mud. "She will not bite now," Aloyne assured him, though she possessed no proof of it, only conviction. The Falcon shifted her weight but did not strike. Instead, she regarded Aloyne as though considering a private question. Above them, Westmore Castle rose, gray and uncompromising against the dull sky. The towers stood as if they had stood forever. The moors rolled beyond the walls, purple-brown and endless. Somewhere unseen, the river ran black and cold over stone. Aloyne climbed down from the carriage with as much dignity as the moment allowed, the great bird still balanced upon her wrist. She had not come 4 days from London to be turned away by a creature of feathers. In her bag lay a letter signed by Mr. Barnaby Fitch, secretary to His Grace the Duke of Westmore. It granted her entry to the estate library for the purpose of translating a medieval manuscript in exchange for a sum generous enough to keep her aunt in coal and herself in books for the coming year. She would not leave without doing the work. There was a particular art to being a woman who did what women were not meant to do. It required calm. It required patience. It required the refusal to flinch when the world expected one to retreat. Aloyne Fairfax had perfected that art. Her father, Thomas Fairfax, had served as land steward to the late Duke of Westmore for 20 years. He had managed accounts with diligence and honesty. He had died in disgrace, accused of financial irregularities that had shattered his reputation. Aloyne had inherited nothing but his books and his ruined name, the books she had kept, the name she had set about restoring. 5 years she had worked in quiet obscurity, translating brittle Latin for antiquarians in London, rendering Norman French into careful English for scholars who had not expected the translator to be a woman at all. She had learned to let their surprise pass like weather. When the commission from Westmore arrived, she had stared at it for a long time before packing her trunk. Now she stood in the castle yard, a falcon on her bare wrist, and knew that she had crossed into something far larger than a simple translation. Mr. Barnaby Fitch met her in the great hall. He was a fair-haired man with the anxious expression of one who anticipated disaster before it arrived. His gaze flickered between Aloyne and the bird with open alarm. "Miss Fairfax," he began in a hushed voice, "there is a small difficulty." "Is there?" Aloyne replied calmly. His Grace was not entirely aware that Fairfax was a woman, she finished. Mr. Fitch closed his eyes briefly. He believed the translator to be a Mr. Edmund Fairfax. "There is no Edmund," she said. "There is only me." Before Mr. Fitch could answer, a door opened at the far end of the hall. The Duke of Westmore entered as a man enters his own fortress, tall, dark-haired, his riding coat damp at the hem from the moors. His posture straight, though something in the set of his left shoulder suggested an old wound borne without complaint. His gaze moved first to the falcon. "Ara," he said quietly. Then his eyes settled upon Aloyne. "That bird has taken 2 fingers and an ear," he informed her evenly. "Who are you?" "Miss Aloyne Fairfax, your translator." Silence followed, not empty silence but the kind that builds walls around itself. "My translator," he repeated, "is a man." "There is no man," she said steadily. "There is only competence." Something flickered in his eyes, not anger, not amusement, something far more watchful. "She has never settled on anyone's wrist willingly," he said, indicating the falcon. "She appears to have made an exception." The Duke stepped closer, studying the bird, then her. The scar across the back of his left hand caught the light. Old, pale, a mark of something endured. "You cannot stay," he said at last. "I have a signed commission. I will compensate you for the journey." "I do not want compensation," she replied. "I want to work." Another silence. Then he turned to Mr. Fitch. "Put Miss Fairfax in the East Wing. The library is on the 2nd floor." He began to walk away, then paused. "If she can return Ara to the Mews without losing a finger," he added, "she may remain." And he left. The library was vast and cold and magnificent. Shelves climbed 2 stories high along the eastern wall. The arrangement was chaotic but loved. Books leaned against one another in companionship rather than order. Aloyne felt it at once. This was not a decorative room, it was a thinking room. The manuscript lay within a glass case near the fireplace. 47 pages of vellum, dense Latin script, illustrations of hawks in precise postures of training. It bore resemblance to Frederick of Sicily's great work on falconry, yet it was not a copy. It was something else, something argued, something hidden. In the margins, another hand had written furiously in Norman French. Aloyne leaned closer, and there beside a passage on training she saw 2 letters, T.F. her father's initials. She sat very still. The wind pressed against the windows. The November light lay thin and gray across the table. T.F. knows where the stone lies. "Ask him before the tide turns." Her breath slowed. This was no ordinary commission. This was a secret, and secrets at Westmore Castle had already ruined one Fairfax. She closed the manuscript gently. Whatever she had stepped into when she extended her bare hand in the castle yard, it was far more than a bird's trust. It was the beginning of a reckoning. Aloyne did not speak of the initials that first evening. She had long ago learned that knowledge, once released, could not be recalled. It was wiser to understand a thing fully before placing it in another's hands. So she copied the marginal note carefully into her own notebook, closed the manuscript, and allowed the silence of the library to settle around her like a cloak. Outside, the wind moved across the Northumberland moors with tireless purpose. Within, Westmore Castle held its breath. The Duke came to the library the next afternoon. She sensed him before she saw him. There was a particular stillness that entered a room when he did, not loud, not theatrical, but deliberate. A man accustomed to command did not need to announce himself. "You have moved my Pliny," he said from the doorway. Aloyne did not look up at once. "I have moved it to the east shelf." "Why?" "It was lonely." He stepped farther into the room. Lonely. It was wedged between a volume of sermons and a manual on naval artillery. Natural historians prefer the company of their own kind. He regarded the shelves with faint suspicion. "You reorganized my library." "I improved it." He crossed to the reading table and sat opposite her. The act surprised her. He usually remained standing as though ready to depart at any moment. Seated, he appeared no less commanding, but something in his posture suggested fatigue beneath discipline. "What period is the manuscript?" he asked. "Early 13th century," she replied. "The base text is Latin. The marginal notes are later, written in Norman French." He watched her closely. "And do the notes matter?" "They always matter." A pause lingered between them. "Why did you come here, Miss Fairfax?" he asked quietly. "For the commission." "That is not what I asked." She lifted her gaze then and met his directly. "Because my father worked here." His expression altered almost imperceptibly. "Yes." and because his name was ruined here. Silence fell. I was told, the Duke said slowly, that your father mismanaged estate funds. You were told, she agreed. You were not here. I was at war. She inclined her head, so I understand. The fire crackled faintly in the grate. The northern light through the tall windows cast long pale bars across the floorboards. My father was not a thief, she said evenly. The Duke did not answer at once. He studied her as though weighing more than her words. You are very certain. I am. And if you discover something in that manuscript that contradicts your certainty. She held his gaze. Then I will face it. Something shifted in him at that, not softness, not yet but recognition. You are not afraid, he said, of you. She asked calmly, no. The corner of his mouth almost moved, almost. I am not easily frightened either, he replied. But I am not a fool. Westmore Estate is burdened with debt. The northern farms struggle. There are those who would see this land divided, sold, mined. The manuscript may contain a legal instrument that affects inheritance. That is why I commissioned the translation. And you believed a man would be easier to manage, she said. Yes. Am I difficult to manage? I have not yet decided. She allowed that to rest between them. That evening she went to the mews. Old Tam Greaves stood within the stone enclosure, tending to the birds with hands scarred by decades of careful work. Ara perched high, her amber eyes following every movement. She settled on you, Tam said without turning. Yes. He studied Aloyne's bare wrist, where faint marks of talon still lingered. She does not trust easily. Neither do I, Aloyne replied. Tam gave a slow nod. Fair enough. She watched Ara in the fading light. Why does she scream at dawn? Tam considered. Some birds remember being wounded. They do not forget the cold. They wake before the sun to make certain it has not abandoned them. Aloyne absorbed that quietly. His Grace found her half dead on the moor, Tam continued. Wing broken, starved near to gone. He brought her in himself. She bid him every day for 4 weeks. Yet he kept coming back. Why? Tam's eyes crinkled. Because some creatures only trust what stays. That night Aloyne returned to the manuscript. She turned to the page again. TF knows where the stone lies. Ask him before the tide turns. Below it, written in a darker ink, perhaps added later. Too late, TF is gone, her chest tightened. The next morning she rose before dawn. The yard lay silvered with frost, the air cut like glass. She moved quietly toward the mews and stopped. The Duke stood there already. He wore no coat. Ara perched upon his bare left arm. His face was drawn in the pale light, the scar along his hand stark and white against cold skin. She allows you, Aloyne said softly. Today, he answered. She stepped closer. You try every day. Yes. There was no complaint in his voice, only fact. Ara turned her head toward Aloyne. Slowly, she raised her bare hand once more. The bird looked from the Duke to Aloyne. Then, with grave deliberation, she stepped across. The Duke stared at his empty arm. She likes options, Aloyne said gently. He looked at her then in a way he had not before, not as a complication, not as an inconvenience, as a presence. Things that have been hurt, she continued quietly, do not like to be cornered. His jaw tightened briefly. You speak as though from experience. I do. The wind rose across the yard. Frost glimmered along the stone. They stood close enough now that she could feel the warmth of him through the cold air, close enough that silence became charged rather than empty. Miss Fairfax, he said, but her name sounded different in his mouth. Aloyne, she corrected softly. He hesitated, then nodded once. Aloyne. The word lingered between them like a fragile offering. A door slammed somewhere within the castle, the spell fractured. Ara shifted her talons. He stepped back. I will have the steward records brought from the archives, he said in a more formal tone, if you wish to examine them. I do. He inclined his head and left. Aloyne remained in the yard a moment longer, Ara steady upon her wrist. She understood now that the manuscript was not merely about falconry. It was about inheritance, about secrecy. about the preservation of something buried, and somewhere within its pages lay the truth about her father. The moors stretched endless and indifferent beyond the castle walls, but within Westmore something long silent had begun to stir. And this time she would not leave without uncovering it. Lord Aldie Sinclair arrived on a wind-lashed Tuesday. His carriage rolled through the gates with the confidence of a man accustomed to entry. Mud struck the lower stones of the castle wall as though marking possession. Aloyne watched from the gallery above the great hall as he descended, elegant despite the northern chill, his coat cut in London fashion, his gloves pale and immaculate. He surveyed Westmore Castle as one might survey property not yet purchased but already claimed in the mind. Then he saw her. "Miss Fairfax," he said smoothly, taking her hand before she offered it. "The scholarly niece. I recall your aunt speaking of you." His smile was practiced warmth. His eyes were something else entirely. "You are kind to remember," Aloyne replied evenly. "And your father," he continued with a faint tilt of the head, "served this estate, did he not, before the unfortunate matter?" The words were gentle, the wound beneath them was not. "He served faithfully," she said. Sinclair's smile widened slightly. "There are differing accounts." "There are," she agreed. The Duke descended the staircase then, and the air shifted. "Lord Sinclair," he said, not raising his voice. "Westmore," Sinclair answered easily. "Looking well. The Moors agree with you." "We should speak privately," the Duke replied. "Of course, though I confess I would dearly love to see the famous manuscript. I understand you have engaged a translator." His gaze flicked toward Aloyne again. "And what have you discovered, Miss Fairfax?" "Nothing yet of consequence," she said. He watched her for a fraction too long. That evening the library door stood slightly ajar. Aloyne had not intended to overhear, yet the corridor was narrow and Sinclair's voice carried. "You cannot maintain this estate indefinitely," Sinclair was saying, the softness gone from his tone. "The northern farms fail. The coal survey you refused would have provided revenue." "There will be no mine under my land," the Duke replied. "You are out of options." "I am not." "I know about the debt," Sinclair continued calmly. "I know to whom it is owed. I offer to buy the estate outright, generous terms. You may retire to London with dignity." There was a pause heavy as iron. "Get out of my study," the Duke said. Sinclair laughed quietly. "You think loyalty built this estate. It was influence. It was calculation. Your father understood that. Your steward understood that. Some men simply understand it better than others." Footsteps approached. Aloyne withdrew into shadow before the door opened. Her hands trembled once she reached the library. She opened the manuscript to the page again. "T.F. knows where the stone lies." The following afternoon she went to the Mews. "Tam," she said quietly, "did my father ever speak to you of estate records?" The old falconer studied her face before answering. "He found something," Tam said at last. "In 15, old payments, old arrangements. He took it to the late Duke. And the late Duke told him to let it lie." "But he did not." Tam shook his head. "Your father wrote everything down, careful as a winter ledger. Whether that writing survived him, I cannot say." "And Sinclair?" Tam's silence lengthened. "Lord Sinclair has wanted Westmore for 20 years, he said finally. Long before the war, long before the debt." The cold seemed to deepen around her. That evening she told the Duke about the marginal note. Not all of it, not yet, but enough. He listened without interruption. "Your father's initials," he said slowly. "In the margin of a manuscript hidden for centuries." "Yes." "And you believe it connects to the accusations?" "I believe it connects to something concealed." He crossed the library to stand opposite her. The firelight carved shadow across his features. "Do you think I knew?" he asked quietly. It was the question beneath every other question. "I believe," she said carefully, "that you were told my father stole from this estate. I believe you had no reason to doubt it, but I also believe you are not a careless man." "And yet," he said, "I allowed his name to remain disgraced." "You were not here when it happened." "I returned and did not undo it." Silence fell. "I allowed you to stay," he said after a moment, "because I wanted to see what you would find." The words struck harder than anger would have. "You used me," she said quietly. "I expected a scholar who would translate and depart. And instead," he looked at her directly, "instead you are not easy to dismiss." It was not apology, it was truth. She left before dawn. No scene, no accusation. She packed carefully in the dark and descended the stone stair before the castle stirred. A brief note lay upon the library table regarding the manuscript's condition. She did not leave one for him. In the stable yard, Lord Sinclair stood beside a lantern. "Leaving so soon, Miss Fairfax?" he asked pleasantly. "Yes. I heard you found the marginal notes remarkable." Her pulse slowed deliberately. "I have found many things remarkable." He studied her with new interest. "Your father hid something, did he not? Something that would clear his name." She stared at him. "Ancient matters," he continued gently, "best not disturbed." She said nothing more and entered the carriage. It was 3 miles down the northern road, Hadrian's Wall pale beneath moonlight, when understanding struck her like a blow. Sinclair had known. She had told no one but the Duke about the marginalia. No one. Yet Sinclair had spoken of it with certainty, which meant he had known before she arrived. Her father's letters lay within her bag, bundled and carried always. She opened them by lantern light as the carriage rocked forward. One bore correspondence with a Sinclair Esquire, dated 1814. At the bottom of an otherwise mundane page about drainage works was a cipher, a string of numbers referencing a book, Pliny, the very volume she had moved to the east shelf. "Turn back," she told the driver. Dawn was breaking when Westmore rose again from the mist. A single light burned in the Duke's study. She did not hesitate. He looked up when she entered, still in shirt sleeves, ink upon his hand. "You came back," he said. "I found something." She placed the letter upon his desk. "I need Pliny," she said, "and the estate Bible, and I need to know everything you know about Lord Aldous Sinclair." He studied her for a long moment. "It will take time," he said. "I am not leaving again." That, more than anything, altered his expression. By noon they had cracked the cipher. By 3 o'clock they understood it. Her father had encoded proof of systematic payments made under pressure, money redirected, funds misused under instruction from the late Duke and manipulated by Sinclair for leverage. 30 years of corruption hidden beneath the appearance of routine estate accounting. "Your father was paying him," she said without inflection. "I suspected," the Duke replied. "I could never prove." He moved to the window overlooking the moors. "I traced intelligence failures during the war," he continued quietly. "Information reached the wrong hands. Men died. I believed it originated here. I could not link it to Sinclair." "Now you can," she said. He turned back toward her. "This will not be quiet," he said. "When it becomes public, Sinclair will make it ruinous. He will drag your father's name through every newspaper in the North." "It has been dragged before," she replied. "This time the truth will accompany it." He studied her with something approaching awe. "I should have looked harder years ago," he said. "You came home wounded," she answered. "You were managing debt and grief. You did not have enough." "That is generous." "It is accurate." Outside, the wind swept across the moors with relentless honesty. "What do you intend to do?" she asked. He met her gaze. "I intend to end it." For the first time since her arrival, Aloyne felt not only the stirrings of truth but the steady ground of alliance. Westmore was no longer merely a place of secrets. It was a place where reckoning had begun. And this time, neither of them intended to retreat. The reckoning did not arrive quietly. Letters were dispatched that very evening. One to Lord Aldgate of the Society of Antiquaries. One to a senior official at the Home Office, a man who had once served beside the Duke in the Peninsula and who understood the cost of compromised intelligence. Copies of the decoded cipher were enclosed, pages in Thomas Fairfax's own careful hand. Names, dates, payments, proof. Within a fortnight, the north of England stirred with rumor. Lord Aldous Sinclair denied the accusations at first. He spoke loudly in drawing rooms and publicly in Newcastle, calling the documents fabrications. He invoked the late Duke's memory. He invoked honor. He invoked his long service to the region. But honor does not endure close scrutiny. When the Home Office inquiry began in earnest, when ledgers were opened and signatures examined, when witnesses who had long remained silent were summoned to speak, Sinclair's composure fractured. By February, constables stood at his door. By March, he attempted to leave the country. He did not succeed. The newspapers carried the story in sober columns. The Westmore estate corruption, the concealed payments, the steward wrongly accused. Thomas Fairfax's name appeared again in print, but this time beside the truth. Aloyne read the article at her aunt's kitchen table in London. The morning light fell across the paper in narrow bands. Her aunt watched her from across the hearth with studied restraint. "Well," Aunt Dorothea said at last. "Well," Aloyne answered. It was not triumph she felt. Not even relief exactly. It was something quieter. A door long forced shut had opened. The air beyond it was cold, uncertain, but honest. A letter lay beside the newspaper. She knew the hand before she broke the seal. "Miss Fairfax, I have attempted 4 drafts of this letter. All have met an unfortunate end in my study fire. This 5th version must suffice. Your father was an honorable man. I did not know that clearly enough when I should have. The manuscript has been authenticated. It will be published in the spring. I would have your name upon it, not merely as translator, but as co-author of the introduction. It is as much your father's story as it is mine. The Mews are unsettled. Ara has taken to screaming at dawn. Tam assures me she is exercising her lungs. I suspect she is expressing disapproval. I find the library remains in your arrangement. I have not altered it. I will not pretend eloquence in what follows. I ask whether you would consider returning to Westmore, not as translator, not as commission, simply as yourself. I am present each morning without fail. Lucian Ashby, Duke of Westmore." Aloyne folded the letter slowly. "Northumberland in February," her aunt observed. "It will be cold." "It is always cold," Aloyne replied, "and the moors are unforgiving." "So am I," Aloyne said gently, though her eyes were distant already. She returned in early April. The light had changed. The eastern windows of the Mews admitted pale spring sun that lay in narrow gold across the stone floor. The air carried the faint scent of thawing earth. Ara sat upon her nest. "She has 3 eggs," the Duke said quietly behind her. Aloyne did not look directly. She would prefer discretion. She always prefers discretion. They stood close, not touching, yet familiar with the nearness that had grown between them through long winter conversations. The library had been witness to those hours, the manuscript bound now in glass, the estate records restored, the shelves ordered with care. He had written every morning, she had answered. "I owe you more than apology," he said. "You owe me honesty," she replied. He inclined his head. "I allowed you to work here because I needed the truth. That was selfish." "Yes. And because I hoped you might find something I had not the courage to uncover." She regarded him steadily. "And now?" "Now I find I have courage for matters I once avoided." The wind moved lightly beyond the Mews. "I have been present in body these past 3 years," he continued. "Not in spirit. I returned from war uncertain what remained of me. This estate felt like duty without purpose. And now," he looked at her fully, "now I wish to remain entirely." She removed her right glove. The gesture was instinctive as it had been that first day in the castle yard. Her bare hand rose between them, palm open. "I cannot cure what was broken in you," she said softly, "nor you what was broken in me. I offer only company in the mending." He lifted his scarred left hand, palm turned toward hers. There was a breath of cool air between their hands before they touched. Ara shifted upon her nest, watching. "I would have that," he said, "very much." The eggs remained undisturbed. The bird settled. The public celebration of the manuscript's publication took place in London in March of 1824. The Society of Antiquaries praised the translation. Miss Aloyne Fairfax was named in the proceedings for her meticulous scholarship. She did not attend. There were better places to be. The proposal came not in a garden nor beneath a chandelier, but in the library among shelves she had reordered and books she had come to know. They were debating ancient woodland rites. "I wish you to be here when we argue about this in 20 years, he said abruptly. She stared at him. "That is the least romantic declaration I have heard." He drew a breath. "I wish you to be here in 20 years. I wish to continue being present. I am better at it when you are in the room." She smiled faintly, marginally improved. He produced a ring from his coat pocket, pearl and sapphire set in old gold. "I have carried this for 6 weeks, he admitted. "Every attempt at eloquence has failed." "Proceed without eloquence," she suggested. He met her eyes. "Eloine Fairfax, I would build a life with you here at Westmore. I would share its burdens and its quiet mornings. I would argue about forests and manuscripts and shelves badly arranged. Will you consent to that?" She laughed once, soft and bright as spring. "Yes," she said. In April the muse glowed with new light. Ara stepped carefully from her nest and crossed the short distance to stand upon Eloine's wrist. The Duke's hand rested just above her elbow, steady and warm. The pearl and sapphire caught the thin northern sun. "There," Eloine said quietly. There was no grand gesture, no thunderous declaration, only presence. Outside, the long line of Hadrian's Wall stretched across the moors as it had for centuries. Empires had risen and fallen. Secrets had been kept and uncovered. Names had been ruined and restored. Within the stone walls of Westmore Castle, something had chosen to return, not from training, not from force, but by choice. And the choosing, as the manuscript had once said, was everything. If you enjoyed this Regency tale of love, loyalty, and redemption, share your thoughts below and follow for more stories from the halls of dukes and the wild moors of England.